Today we're interviewing, how should I say it, someone who's encountered the worst possible nightmare in his life for his family, and really has been an incredible source not only of inspiration, but an incredible source of comfort for many of those who are experiencing the events of October 7th and the events that have taken place since then. And the name Rabbi Leo Dee is an internationally renowned name. Rabbi Dee, with incredible dignity, incredible courage, after the slaughter of his wife Lucy, after the slaughter of his two daughters, how he communicated to the world, not just to the Jewish world, not just to those who were the pro-Israel world, but how he communicated to all of humanity. And since this time, Rabbi Dee, I know that many communities in America have turned to him, many communities in Israel have turned to him. Almost a living Job, a person literally of what he has gone through, has served as a role model, as a source of inspiration, of guidance, of mentorship to those who have encountered the worst events since October 7th. And Rabbi Dee, I can't thank you enough for what you've done, not only for the Jewish world, not only for the Israeli world, but what you've done for humanity. And it's an incredible honor for us, the Friends of the IDF, to have you and to learn from you and to hear from you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for inviting me.
Rabbi Dee, would you share with us, for those who are not familiar with the experience that happened last Pesach to your family, give us a little background and then from there we can go forward.
We set off, it was a Friday morning, the first day after the holiday of Pesach, so Chol Hamoed Pesach, and we drove up to the north to a holiday in Tiberias. We were in two cars. I was with Tali and Yehuda. My daughter Karen was staying in Jerusalem for Shabbat with her work, national service. Lucy was driving with my daughter Maya, who was 20, and Rena was 15. Waze directed us up the 90 and suggested we take a turn to the left halfway up. And I changed the Waze in order to redirect it and continued straight. Lucy didn't. And she encountered two terrorists with Kalashnikovs and 20 bullets. The girls were killed on the spot. And Lucy was airlifted to Hadassah Ein Keren Hospital in Jerusalem, where she passed away on the Monday. So we buried Maya and Rena on the Sunday and Lucy on the Tuesday.
And if you could share with us what this does to a family, you as a husband, you as a father, your other two children as siblings, as children, just the stages, of what you went through, what it was like as the Jewish world came to you, on the one hand to support you, on the other hand to gain inspiration from you.
Steve, it pulls the family apart. The first challenge is reestablishing ourselves as a family of four, having been a family of seven, and all the dynamics have changed. After the Shiver, the 7 days of mourning, I took a piece out of our dining room table that was set, probably for, big enough for 8 people, and I reduced it down to a size for 6. And every time I looked at that table, I just cried because it was too painful. So I put the piece back in. It took us a few months before we could sit around that table, just the 4 of us. We had friends round. We went out for meals, but it was too painful to sit there without Lucy, Maya, and Rena. And we heard of families who had been through this similar tragedies that didn't sit down together for 8 years without, friends or being out, or 1 year. Fortunately, I encountered somebody who told me that they came back from the funeral. Their father said, when their sister died very young, this is a house to live in, and we're going to sit down immediately. And they did. So I had that in mind and really after about 3 months, we managed to sit down for our first meal around the table, just the four of us.
You made a number of Shiva visits. You encountered a number of friends, families, community members. I'm making an assumption when I ask this question. Probably we're more interested in hearing from you, having suffered what you went through, than just a regular person coming to be Menachem Avel, to comfort the mourner. What were some of the interactions you had making some of these Shiva visits?
I was invited on one occasion to speak to a mother of a soldier, and I was told that she wasn't able to cope. So I sat with her for an hour at her Shiver, and I talked about the sort of things that have helped me. Most of all, really getting involved in projects to remember the girls in a positive way. Probably not a conversation to have at a Shiver, to be honest, but that's what took place. And I had the honor, a friend of a father of a fallen soldier called me up and told me that his friend hadn't left the house for 4 months since October the 7th. And he said, could I meet with him and maybe try and talk to him? So I said, yes. They lived in Tel Aviv. I said, well, I'll meet you in Modi'in. So he brought his friend out the house for the first time, and they met with me in a cafe in Modi'in. And really, I just talked to him about my experience of going through the grief and how to try and channel that energy into something positive, because it's very easy to sit and mourn forever, but that doesn't really, it doesn't help me and it doesn't help anyone. And so very quickly I worked out that my job as a mourner is to try and find ways that I can remember Lucy, Maya and Rena and actually smile and not cry. So that was really my challenge.
One of the programs that we're engaged in funding, actually we administrated because the Ministry of Defense asked us to take younger siblings and to take orphans, different ages. Some of them are 12 and 13. They're brought to American summer camps and they spend a weekend in a community. Others are high school age. They're going on special trips, like almost like a NCSY or a USY on wheels, 2 of them across the East Coast, 1 across the West Coast. And the advisors for these young, in the case of many of them orphans, in the case of many of them younger siblings who've lost an older sibling, all fit into that category. The advisors themselves had also either lost a father or mother at war or lost an older sibling. And one of the comments that the casualty officers from the Ministry of Defense shared with us, from the Army shared with us, is that these young men and young women, they almost can't speak with their parents because they see the pain on their parents' face and they don't want to cause more pain. At school, no one really understands what they're going through. And specifically, the reason they set up these programs is because at least they're with people who have walked in the Indian's moccasin, who have, so to speak, experienced the same thing they've experienced. It's almost like something that you and I throughout our lives have seen. Look at survivors. When they sit with other survivors, there's a different language they speak. Sometimes it's a language of silence, sometimes it's a language of communication, but they understand each other. They understand where others have been, whereas no one else has been there. No one else can really appreciate that. So I would just assume, you know, whether it is your children, whether it's yourself, there's a certain language or there's a certain authority that you have when all of these people are going through, whether it's the loss of a child, the loss of a brother, the loss of a son. When they speak to you, they almost are much more open to hearing you, to being with you, than they would someone like myself, an outsider.
There's interesting, Steve. I found at our Shiver we had, I think, well over 10,000 visitors. And people ask me, who did I find more comforting? Was it my closer friends or strangers? And I think it was the strangers. First of all, those people who had suffered similar tragedies. One gentleman walked in. He'd lost his wife and 2 kids in a car crash, which was semi-terror related a year before. And he had been severely injured, but he managed to walk in pretty strongly. And he had a broad smile on his face. And just looking at him, to be honest, that's all I needed. Was I saw him and I thought, it's possible to to come out the other end of this and still retain some sort of humanity. And that was a tremendous comfort. Another lady came and she was incredible. She said to me, when this happens, she says, you could demand miracles from God and he owes it to you. And she told me some amazing stories that happened to her, things that she demanded from God and things that had come true. And that was something which I did. And actually, you know what? A number of these miracles came true. And that was a tremendous help. But often, as you know, when you go to visit somebody, it's not you who gives them strength, it's them who give you strength. So a month after October the 7th, my daughter Karen, who was then 19, wanted to go and visit the families from Be'eri, who were in a hotel in the Dead Sea. So we turned up. She spoke to the kids, I spoke to some of the adults, and we discovered there was a shiver going on a month after October the 7th, because it took a month to presumably to find all the pieces or to bury the bodies. And they were sitting Shiver a month after. And there was a gentleman called Avida Bechar, who was sitting in a wheelchair with one leg. And he told me his story, which was really heartbreaking, that they were under attack for 12 hours by Hamas terrorists in their safe room. They tried to open the door. They managed to keep it closed. They smashed a small hole in the window. They threw in 3 hand grenades. And in the end, he lost his wife and his 15-year-old son. And he was sitting Shiver for them that evening. And he told me the whole story with a tremendous strength. And I just looked at him and I thought, how can you have this strength? And then after dinner in the hotel, we went with all the kibbutz, 1,000 people, to the hall of the hotel. And they had a kibbutz meeting where the leaders of the kibbutz stood up in front of the 1,000 people. And each night they were telling them how many people had been discovered, dead bodies, and whether the hostages had been taken and the status of the hostages. And I looked around the room and I realized that this gentleman had not lost 2 members of a family of 6, but 2 members of a family of 1,000. And I realized that because of the fact that the whole world sort of put their arms around us during our tragedy, we felt that we hadn't lost 3 members of a family of 7, but actually 3 members of a family of many millions. And I think that maybe, if there's any encouragement to people to turn up at a Shiver and to visit people, even if you don't know them, it is a tremendous strength that you can give to a family. Even if you sit there without saying anything, really nothing you can say. In fact, the best thing you can say to somebody who's suffered a tragedy like this is, there are no words. There are no words. The worst thing is when people try and put words to it and they try and describe how you must be feeling. That is extremely painful, and I don't recommend it. The other bad thing you can say to someone who's suffered a terrible tragedy is, how are you? Which seems very benign, but it puts you on the spot, and actually you have to answer fine, which you're not. So it's very uncomfortable. I heard from a friend of mine that the best question is, how are you today? And then that gives the person the opportunity to say, I'm fine, with the understanding that it may not be true tomorrow.
For the children, going through it's very different than for a spouse, etc. And again, I would ask you, from some of the Shiva visits you've made, some of the people you've encountered, as well as from some of your own children, what is it that they deal with that's unique to that may not be what a spouse is going through?
So one of the things that I noticed is that a few years ago I saw some research that we had 4 daughters. And 4 daughters was the optimum combination, apparently, in a family of girls. That meant that they were most likely to get on well. And in fact, my girls got on extremely well. All of them, were best of friends, really. They were constantly in and out of each other's bedrooms. And on holidays, they would be sharing. And it was tremendous. The worst combination, according to this research, was 2 girls. So my daughters, Tali and Karen, have gone from the ideal scenario of 4 sisters to 2, which is the most difficult. And so just the change in the family structure, that is probably the greatest challenge. How to reestablish a relationship between two sisters when they've been used to having four, and that's work in progress.
If I could take you in a different area, when you spoke in Teaneck at Keter Torah to close to 900 people, you shared, apparently you'd been interviewed by, I think it was CNN or a couple of other international news media. And some of the things some of the questions in the interview were very, let's just say, inappropriate and wrong. Can you share with us some of those encounters?
So CNN called me during the Shiver, the 7 days of mourning, and they asked me the questions about what happened, and I talked about the attack. At the end of about 7 minutes, Christine McFarlane cuts me off, and then she announces to the camera, "Thank you, Rabbi Dee. We will now be turning after the break to a Palestinian who's in exactly the same situation as Rabbi Dee, but from the other side." Which, of course, was absolutely not true, because there's been no terror attack by any Jew on Arabs for 30 years, and nothing like this at all. So, of course, that was extremely painful. And then, of course, Christine Amnapur, a couple of weeks later, was interviewing the president of the Palestinian Authority, and she talked about the shootout with the D-girls, implying that they were shooting back, that this was a sort of fair fight between Palestinians and Israelis. Again, that was extremely painful. So, I feel in the middle of that, I had a correspondence, I had a call with the head of the office in CNN in Jerusalem, and I asked him directly. So would you say that my pain in your eyes is equivalent to that of the mother of the terrorists? And he said, "Rabbi Dee, we'll have to agree to disagree." And I think that really sums up, some of these news programs, that they have this idea of moral equivalence between terrorists and Israelis and victims, and they have no ability to differentiate between the two. So we see this in the current coverage of the war.
Terrific. If you could share some last thoughts with our listeners in terms of, they're going to have a chance over time, whether when they go to Israel, whether when we bring families here, they're going to have a chance to meet, to encounter families that have suffered the worst of losses. Any recommendations in terms of how they should conduct themselves, what they should say, etc.?
I think that I prefer personally people just being themselves. So I think that there's no way of anticipating how someone's going to react. People will react different ways. But I can tell you that there was a group of English rabbis who came to Israel about 2 months ago. And they invited me to go with them on a trip to visit Be'eri and Kfar Aza and other places where there'd been terror attacks. And I was a bit reticent about it, because I felt that it felt a little bit like terror tourism, and I didn't want to be a voyeur. But they convinced me to come. So we were going around Be'eri with one gentleman who showed us the house where his mother was murdered, and then the house where his father was murdered. And he took us through the rooms and explained what had happened. And in the middle of the visit, one of the rabbis turned to this gentleman and said to him, "How do you feel when you're telling us this story?" And he paused and he said, "This is the 4th trip that I've done." He said, "And to be honest, I find it therapeutic." And I took a deep breath of relief. And I realized that for me, this is also therapeutic, speaking to you and speaking to groups. And when I talk about it, it's part of my therapy. And I think that people, when they come, they can realize that actually they're doing a great favor to people when they ask them questions. They're inquisitive, they want to know more about what happened. Because the ability to talk about it is something which really helps you to think through what happened, and I'm not saying get over it, but at least to constantly keep it in mind. I mean, it's a great it's a great comfort to be able to talk about it and not cry. And the more you can do that, the more you prove to yourself that you're dealing with it, the stronger you feel. So actually, people bring you strength by asking you and proving to you that you can do it.
Rabbi Dee, you and Lucy, you started your family, my understanding is in London. You're a rabbi of a community there. Can you tell us your decision as parents to raise a family in Israel, your inspiration, your choice, the challenges of making that move to Israel? Because I'm sure there are many people listening that are participating in this Zoom that are thinking about themselves ultimately fulfilling the dream of moving their family to Israel.
Right. So we actually left England in 2004, which is at the end of the Second Intifada, in order for me to study in Shiver to become a rabbi. And I remember having a conversation with Lucy at the time, because it was dangerous at the time in Efrat where we were planning to study. And Lucy said, it's better to die in Israel than to live, your life wishing that you'd been there. So that was the decision made in that case. And we turned up in Efrat. We lived happily, Baruch Hashem, in Efrat for 4 years as I studied, and we had 2 more children there. So we had 4 daughters at that point. And then we left to England for 6 years on shlichut to work as a rabbi and a rebbitzin in 2 communities, which was a great honor and privilege. But after a year of being in England, Lucy turned to me one morning and said, "We must go back to Israel." She said, it's the only place to bring up Jewish children. And she was absolutely right. I mean, we had this vision of the Israeli youth that we saw already back then, 2004, 2008. And they were incredible. They're so enlightened. They're so energetic. Life is outdoors. They're independent. They make their own way to school, even some of them at the age of 5, which would be illegal probably in most countries, but they're walking down the street holding the hand of their 3-year-old brother or sister on the way to school. It's a beautiful life, certainly in settlements like Efrat, where people know each other. It's like being in America or Britain in the 1960s. That's really what won us over. So Lucy said we have to bring them back. So we made a plan and we came back after 6 years. And I have to say one of the most emotional things that happened after the mourning period. During the Shiva, a 17-year-old boy came up to me from Efrat and said, "Rabbi Dee, would you mind if we dedicate a park in Efrat to your girls?" He said, "We'll raise the money, we'll build it. I just want your blessing." So I said, "Absolutely, with great pleasure." 6 months later, he calls me and says, "I'd like you to see it." I'd seen the sign had already gone up. It was quite near to our home, but I hadn't dared to go in there because I felt it quite emotional. And he took me to the path, down this path, and there were a few others, now 18-year-old boys, 17, 18-year-old boys, building a pergola. And they literally were holding iPhones in their hands, learning how to use the drill, doing an incredible job. And they built this thing from scratch. They got the town council to build a path through the mountain. They put in pipes for watering. They put in electricity for lights. They put in the signs. They put in furniture. They planted plants. I mean, what they didn't do was absolutely incredible. This was like about 20 of them who just volunteered. It took them 6 months of all their free time. And I cried because this was exactly the reason that Lucy had brought us back to Efrat, that our kids could be, influenced by these kids. And thank God, my kids have been influenced by those kids. And I've got, one daughter now one daughter who's in national service, 2 years looking after kids from disadvantaged families. I've got a second daughter who's going into the Air Force in July. And my son is already working out so that he could get a good job in the army in a couple of years' time.
For those who are not aware, Efrat is a beautiful suburb of Jerusalem. It's just south in the Judean hills. In Rabbi Dee, is this correct that there are 6 parts to Efrat? There are 6 different communities, or 7,
yes.
Something like that?
Yes. Yeah.
Many Americans, Brits, South Africans who've made Aliyah have chosen to move to Efrat. because it's 31 flavors in terms of the community. Fascinating group, a fascinating mix of Jews from all different backgrounds. And many of them have a very short commute to Jerusalem because it's one of the suburbs there. Beautiful community. And obviously the Dee family has shaped and made that community what it is.
We've been shaped by the community as well. It takes a community to raise children. I think that's really what we saw in Efrat, was it is the place to raise children. And thank God there are many beautiful settlements and towns and even cities in Israel where there are also beautiful places to bring up a family. And if we look at our soldiers today who are fighting bravely on the fronts, as somebody pointed out, the TikTok generation is fighting like lions. Who would believe that these kids would put their phones down and would fight? But they're actually braver than any generation previously. And I think the whole world is looking at them today and saying, we wish that our kids could be like this. And of course, it's possible, but they have to make certain changes to their countries, make a little bit more like Israel, and they can do it too. But really, I think our youth are a light unto the nations.
Rabbi Dee, on behalf of us, the Friends of the IDF, on behalf of our supporters, we want to thank you. We want to thank you for sharing with us. It's a part of life, and it's a part of the reality in Israel that no one should have to go through, but the reality is many do have to go through. And we also want to thank you for being so dignified and being a role model to Jews, to Christians across the world. And thank you for your strength, for your inspiration, for your mentorship under these very challenging times. And it's just very proud for us at FIDF to know that we have you, we have your children to look up to as role models. And God bless you, God bless your family, and God bless the people of Israel.
Thank you. God bless IDF, and thank you for all the tremendous work that you continue to do.
Thank you.